What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. Often when I'm working with writers and I ask, what does this character want? I get something abstract, like she wants to be happy or he wants to get his life together. But you want to bring it into the world of the real. It has to be tangible and measurable. Otherwise, how will the reader know if she achieves it or not? Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. A big challenge many writers face is keeping their story focused on one single driving point. So the reader sifts through random characters, details, and descriptions that feel separate from the characters. There's irrelevant backstory, extraneous events, and mundane details and conversations that make it hard to decipher and follow the story. Much of my work with clients is getting clear on what their story is about, what the driving focal point is. When the story's single driving point isn't clear, readers lose focus, they get frustrated, confused, and bored. They stop reading. So what's the single focal point driving your story? In today's episode, I'll give you 5 questions to help you get clear and focused on what's driving your story forward. The focal point from which all the events revolve around. Before we get to that, let's talk about the reader. Readers are always looking for patterns, not consciously, but it is a human instinct. We read not just for entertainment or escape, but to live vicariously through your character, to live dangerously through them. Now, I don't mean physical danger necessarily, but emotional danger. When the reader disappears into a story, they're imagining themselves into your character's world. They're transported into your character's experience. Now, that experience may be similar to or light years away from their own experiences. We want to live vicariously through your characters. We want to drop into their experience. But when we can't navigate that experience, when you don't give us a clear path to follow, we get lost and abandon the story. So you want to guide readers through your character's journey. Now, writers often overcomplicate their story and it loses focus. Now, I'm not saying your story shouldn't be complicated, only that all roads should lead to a single driving point. Think of your story as a web. A spider web is an architectural masterpiece. There's a frame, and then there's radii from a center point. And all those radii lead back to that center point. They radiate outward, but they all lead back to that center point. That's how stories are orchestrated. There's a single focal point, and then all the strands of your stories spin out of and lead back to that center focal point. When a story lacks focus, there are random events, characters, there's lots of backstory, etc. And the reader doesn't know why any of that is meaningful to the main character. So here are 5 questions to help you find your story's focal point. Question number 1. Why does this story matter to you? What about the story draws you in as the writer? Forget about the reader for a minute. This is your personal rock bottom impetus for starting the story in the first place. What was the initial spark? Why have you taken the story as far as you have? You need to tap into that internal combustion from which your story has sprung. This is what gives your story meaning. It's what gives your story purpose. It's what makes it feel true. For example, one of my stories was born out of heartbreak over a man who I wanted to be with, but circumstances prevented that. The story was not about the man. It was about a girl trying to make sense of her father's sudden death, who was murdered. So the grief from my real life came out as grief over suddenly losing a parent. I transformed my real experience, my real life sorrow and grief, into a story that on the surface was not at all my present reality, but it was still true emotionally. That's what drew me into the story and compelled me to write, revise, and finish it. So think back to when the story first came to you. What was the original impetus? Why are you personally drawn to this story? This is a great start to finding your story's focal point. Okay, on to question number 2. What does your character come into the story already wanting and why? Doug Glover always says a novel is an engine of desire. So what does your character want? And why is this meaningful to him or her? Often writers know what their main character wants, but the missing piece is why it's meaningful to him or her. We need to know what's at stake. If your protagonist wants to find a buried treasure, what's the deeper need? If a character wants food, the need is hunger, not the food. But sometimes the character's want is too abstract. She wants to be happy. He wants to be a better person. She wants to recover from her lousy childhood. When I was working on early drafts of my story about grief, my editor said that I had to bring her father into the story more, otherwise it was just absence. And without some glimpses of him before his death, the reader couldn't know what was lost. So I had to find ways to make her loss more tactile. And often when I'm working with writers and I ask, what does this character want? I get something abstract, like she wants to be happy or he wants to get his life together. But you want to bring it into the world of the real. It has to be tangible and measurable. Otherwise, how will the reader know if she achieves it or not? So back to my example. My character wants to come to terms with her father's sudden death. It's a lot to wrap her head around. That's a pretty abstract desire. And so I used concrete objects to concretize that desire. For example, the father had a lamp in his apartment that went on by touch, and after his death, that lamp would go on without being touched. That was her clue that he was still hovering around her. Her mother said it was an electromagnetic glitch, not her father. Now, as a story, the desire is not something as concrete as, say, wanting to move my family to Paris or marry Vronsky. So I had to bring it into the concrete world of the real. So if your character wants to find happiness, what does that look like? Now, your character may not believe she stands a chance of getting what she wants, but that's not the point. What does he or she want, and why does it matter? What does getting this mean to your character? How would her life be different? What would her life look like if she got what she wanted? Your character is more motivated by hopes or expectations for the future than by what happened in their childhood or years before. So what will happen to your character if she doesn't get what she wants? This is her underlying fear, which she must overcome if she's going to get what she wants by the end of the story. Okay, on to question number 3. What does your character need to believe in order to get what he or she wants? Your main character encounters obstacles and interference, people, situations, it might be weather, and other dilemmas that make getting what he or she wants difficult. But the biggest obstacle is within. For example, my character's belief is that her father is still around in some spiritual form. She's in denial. It's just too painful. She can't fully process her grief until she accepts that he is indeed gone. Now, sometimes this is referred to as a misbelief. It's the deeper impediment to getting what your character wants. Whatever happens on the plot level, the external events will force your character to confront those beliefs and change them. That is the transformation. So the external events trigger your character's deepest fears and force him or her to reevaluate what they believe is true. Okay, on to question number 4. What's the main question your story is seeking to answer? This is the question you're seeking answers to. For me, the question guiding my story was, what happens when people die? Where do they go? Are they still here? My character was desperately clinging to the belief that her father was still with her. And by the end, she came to the crushing realization that he was truly gone. So what's the question you personally are trying to answer through your character? Now, your personal question might be, how do I absolve my guilt about wronging someone? I'm immediately thinking of Atonement by Ian McEwan. Cecilia's younger sister, Briony, wrongly accuses Cecilia's boyfriend, the housekeeper's son, Robbie, of rape. Robbie is sent to prison, and the lovers who've known each other since childhood and have just consummated their love are separated. 4 years later, in exchange for early release, Robbie is sent to serve in World War II. We then jump 2 years later, where Robbie and Cecilia are living together in London, and Briony visits Cecilia to ask forgiveness and suggests correcting her testimony, and she apologizes for her deceit. Then, decades later, when Briony is a successful novelist, she gives an interview about her latest book, an autobiographical novel titled Atonement. And so the reader learns that the portion of the book where Robbie and Cecilia are living together and Briony attempts to apologize to them is fictitious. The reality is that she could never atone for her mistake. And Cecilia and Robbie never reunited. Robbie died of sepsis from his infected wound at Dunkirk, and Cecilia drowned months later during an underground flood due to the tube station bombing during the Blitz. So We learn, and Briony admits, that she wrote her novel with its fictitious ending to give the two in fiction the happiness they never had. Now, although the events in the novel are fictitious, the driving question that obsessed the author most likely was, how does one atone for ruining two people's lives? In memoir, the question might be, how do I find self-acceptance? Or why did I do that thing when I was 20? What caused me to make that choice? Or the question could be, how do you survive the death of a child? The reader is asking things like, if I were still haunted by a schoolmate who bullied me, how would I release that trauma as an adult? If I hated my job and wanted to move to Paris and start all over, would I take that risk and go? Or would I choose comfort and security and stay with the job I hate? If I was facing 2 life sentences for killing my stalker, and I had a young son on the outside living with a relative who I didn't trust, what would I do to break free so I could be reunited with my son? If I were one of the women enslaved by a regime to produce children for the commander of that regime, if I were separated from my husband, my child, and my freedom, what would I do to break free? So, what's the central question your story is seeking to answer? This is the question you are seeking to answer through your characters. Okay, last one, question 5. What do you want readers to come away from your story thinking, feeling, or believing? Do you want them to feel victorious on your main character's behalf? Do you want them to feel heartbroken or hopeful? Devastated or joyous? What's the takeaway? For example, a takeaway could be, the fear of loss can cause us to deny ourselves true love. Another takeaway could be, you never know how much time you have with someone, so make sure you love them fully. Let your last words always be, I love you. The takeaway really comes out of your protagonist's inner struggle. The external events will trigger that struggle and ultimately make the point. Okay, let's wrap this up. Whenever you realize you don't know exactly where you want your story to go, when you're having trouble finding your story's focal point, ask these 5 questions. Number 1, why does this story matter to you? What was the original impetus that drove you to write the story in the first place? Question number 2, what does your character want and why? Make this concrete. Even if your character's want is abstract, make it tangible. Let it manifest in the world of the real. Number 3, what does your character have to believe before he or she gets what he or she wants? Question 4, what's the essential question your story asks? What is it you're trying to figure out? And question number 5, what do you want readers to feel, think, or believe at the end of your story? What's the takeaway? When you have your focal point dialed in, it makes it so much easier to know what to include in your story and what to leave out. And it makes it infinitely easier for your reader to follow. You want to make sure that you're giving your reader a clear path to follow. You want to guide your readers through your character's journey. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.